Imagine logging into CERN's official academic database.
Right, the exact digital repository where actual particle physicists upload the raw data of the universe.
Exactly, like to ensure global open access. It's a very serious dry space.
Absolutely.
So you click on this rigorously formatted, peer-reviewed paper. It has a digital object identifier, author credentials, all the standard academic metadata.
Yeah.
But then you start reading the abstract and you realize you are looking at the chemical breakdown of like a magical entity emerging from a dimensional rift.
It is a completely jarring collision of context.
Yeah.
I mean, you are primed to receive hard empirical data, and instead you're handed what basically reads like the foundational lore of an entire alternate reality.
Right. And if you're listening to this deep dive right now and thinking, why should I care about a fictional sci-fi story uploaded to a science website?
Which is a fair question.
For sure. But hold that thought, because that initial discomfort, that, sense of categorical confusion, is exactly the trap our subject today wants you to fall into.
Yeah, they're playing with that boundary.
So today's deep dive focuses on the April 2026 edition of Bye 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 magazine. We are unpacking this massive publication event known as the Structured Multiversal Interactions Framework.
Or the SMI for sure.
Right, the SMI. And this entire framework is authored by someone named Dr. Melvin Sewell, who operates under the title of Academic Dean and Diagnostic Architect at the Cosmic University of Echo-Rift Studies 9X.
Which, I mean, what a title.
I know, right? So our mission for you today is to explore how this completely unique material functions as a serious, unified canon.
Because it really is a fascinating intersection.
Yeah.
We're looking at a space where rigorous open access research infrastructure is being utilized for what they call a mythic scientific editorial practice.
Mythic scientific.
Yeah. The goal here isn't to figure out if the physics are real in the traditional sense. It's to understand what happens when someone uses the uncompromising machinery of academia to, validate the mythic.
Right. So before we jump into the actual multiversal rifts or like dimensional physics, we really need to examine this architecture of legitimacy.
The foundation.
Exactly. Because the structural foundation of Dr. Sewell's work is crucial. The way this mimics or authentically utilizes, honestly, actual academic systems is the engine driving the entire project.
Yeah, the medium is the message here.
Completely. So looking at the evidence stacked in our sources today, we have a consolidated ORCD profile for Dr. Sewell.
Which is huge.
It is. For anyone who hasn't spent time in the trenches of academic publishing, an ORCD profile is basically your academic passport.
It's a persistent digital identifier. It distinguishes you from literally every other researcher in the world.
Right. So tying this canon to an ORCD profile immediately shifts the tone. It makes it serious. And tied to that specific profile, Dr. Sewell has published 20 distinct pieces of research housed on Zenodo.
And we should clarify, Zenodo is not a fictional website built for Buy Big magazine.
No, not at all.
It is a highly reputable, real-world, open-access repository. It was developed under the European Open Science Cloud Program.
And it's operated by CERN.
Exactly.
By CERN.
Let's just read some of the paper titles sitting in this CERN repository right now. We have the Courier Bodies Cosmology Framework.
Okay.
We have a Unified Mathematical Framework. We have a Category Theory Diagram Set, all assigned real DOI numbers, properly archived, sitting right next to conventional, state-funded scientific literature.
And that choice of medium forces a really profound engagement from the reader.
How so?
Well, think about it. When you encounter a wild speculative theory on, say, a random blog or a Reddit thread, your brain immediately categorizes it as entertainment.
Right, you just scroll past it.
Exactly. You read it passively. You don't verify the citations because you just assume there aren't any.
Your guard is down. It's just a story.
Yeah.
But here, I have to play devil's advocate regarding the sheer effort involved.
Okay, go for it. Looking at this framework is like watching a master architect hire the world's most meticulous, licensed contractors to build a perfectly to-code house.
Right.
Like, the foundation's poured flawlessly, the plumbing passes every municipal inspection, the wiring is industrial grade, but then the architect furnishes the entire house with impossible, mind-bending, non-Euclidean geometry.
Right, where the doors just open into voids.
Yes. So my question is why? Why go through the painstaking effort of using standard, dry, academic platforms to publish an unconventional multiversal theory?
Well, because Dr. Sewell is leveraging the psychological weight of the academic institution against himself.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, by anchoring the structured multiversal interactions framework within Zenodo, it challenges standard institutional boundaries.
Mhm.
It proves that the tools of rigorous academia, the DOIs, the repositories, the peer review formatting, they're totally agnostic.
Meaning the format doesn't actually care what the data is.
Exactly. The format doesn't care if you're uploading the Higgs boson data or the mapping of an echo rift.
Wow. So by using the master's tools, you force the academic world into a corner. They either have to accept the multiversal theory as properly formatted data, or they have to admit that their strict formatting doesn't inherently equal truth.
Exactly. It acts as a structural critique disguised as cosmology.
Or, depending on how deeply you engage with the SMI framework, it is genuine cosmology utilizing structural critique.
Right. The line is intentionally obliterated. Let's look at one of those publications you mentioned, the category theory diagram set.
Okay, yeah.
In conventional mathematics, category theory is essentially the mathematics of mathematics.
So it's pretty meta.
Very. It's a framework for translating between entirely different mathematical structures, finding the universal connections between them.
So Dr. Sewell isn't just making up math. He's using the real-world mathematical tool designed to bridge incompatible systems.
Exactly. He's using category theory to map out the interactions between entirely different reality levels.
Because if you have two universes with incompatible physical laws,
Category theory would theoretically be the only language capable of charting the interaction between them.
that is just the level of conceptual rigor here is staggering.
It really is.
Okay. But if we accept this massive theoretical architecture, the category theory, the cosmology, the next hurdle is application.
Right. How do we use it?
Yeah. How does Dr. Sewell expect anyone to actually interact with or measure this? Because a cosmological framework isn't much use if we can't observe it.
Well, the sources address this by getting very, very granular. Alongside the theoretical math, the database actually includes published software and practical models.
Yeah, two that immediately jumped out at me from the archive are the reality level analyzer tool and the VR fatigue biosensor model.
Yeah, those are fascinating.
And this initially confused me because, if you're building an all-encompassing multiversal framework charting rifts and cosmic shifts, why focus on something as grounded and mundane as a VR fatigue biosensor?
Right, alongside a reality level analyzer.
Exactly. It feels like checking your car's tire pressure right before you drive into a wormhole.
I love that analogy. But that juxtaposition is there to bridge the gap between baseline human experience and multiversal phenomena.
How does that work?
We need to look at the mechanism of how VR fatigue actually works in the human body. When you put on a virtual reality headset and you start to feel nauseous or fatigued, your brain is detecting a massive mismatch.
Because your eyes think you're moving, right?
Exactly. Your eyes are telling you that you are moving through space, but your inner ear and your physical body know you're standing completely still in your living room.
So that sensory conflict causes biological friction.
Right. Neurological dissonance. The brain is receiving two conflicting reality signals at the exact same time, and it literally makes you physically sick.
Okay, I'm tracking.
Now, pair that biological reality with Dr. Sewell's reality level analyzer. The framework suggests that the friction we feel in virtual reality is on the exact same spectrum as the friction a human would experience when interacting with different multiversal reality levels.
Oh, wow. So the biological response anchors the cosmological theory.
Yes, the human nervous system basically becomes the primary instrument for detecting dimensional rifts.
That is brilliant, because it implies these multiversal interactions aren't just happening out in the cold vacuum of the cosmos, they're happening to your optic nerve.
Exactly.
And that biological anchoring leads directly into one of the most fascinating models published in the Zenodo archive, the SH1 molecule structural record.
Ah, yes, the SH1 resonance. This is really where the mythic scientific practice operates at peak capacity.
So, in the academic archive, this SH1 resonance is presented as a straightforward structural model. It's a molecule. You can imagine the chemical bonding diagrams and the atomic weights.
Right, purely scientific.
But when we cross-reference this scientific record with the narrative provided in the Babe magazine sources, specifically a section titled Chapter 1 Origin, the context completely flips.
It becomes a story.
Exactly. The text describes a figure named Saiku Venga emerging from a rift. And the specific phrasing is that Psychervanga is born between slip flow and counterflow, marked by SH1 resonance.
So we have to unpack those terms to understand the physics Dr. Sewell has constructed here.
Right.
If we extrapolate from the SMI framework, slip flow implies moving with a dimensional current. You're slipping through the fabric of reality with minimum resistance.
Like swimming downstream.
Exactly. But then counterflow, conversely, implies moving against the current of a reality level.
So to be born between slip flow and counterflow means Psychervanga emerged in a state of absolute crushing multiversal friction.
Right. Two opposing dimensional currents slamming into each other.
And the physical residue of that impossible friction, like the biological marker left behind, is the SH1 molecule.
Yes. And this molecule serves as the ultimate synthesis of our entire deep dive today. Because on one hand, it's presented as a sterile empirical data set in a CERN-backed academic repository. But on the other hand, within the narrative framework of the magazine, this exact same molecule is the stigmata of a mythic entity.
Wow. It basically demands that the reader hold two completely opposing thoughts in their head at the exact same time.
It really does.
Like, the SH1 molecule is a quantifiable data point, and the SH1 molecule is the magical footprint of a dimensional traveler.
And the editorial practice doesn't ask you to choose between the science and the mythology. It basically insists that they are the exact same thing.
It creates a state of cognitive dissonance for the reader, which, if you think about it, mirrors the very VR fatigue we just discussed.
That's a great point. Your brain is trying to process a peer-reviewed data set and an origin myth simultaneously.
And it makes the fiction feel dangerously real. It's like finding out the magical sword from a fantasy epic has a meticulously peer-reviewed metallurgical breakdown published in a materials science journal.
Right. It grounds the impossible in mundane reality.
So we have the mathematical theory, and we have the biological tools to measure the phenomena. I think the final question we need to explore is the overarching goal here.
The why.
Exactly. Why run these tools? What is the real-world application of Dr. Sewell's research?
Well, the sources introduce an overarching concept that frames all of this data. They call it sovereign diagnostics.
Yes, sovereign diagnostics. And there is a very specific, loudly broadcast disclaimer on the site regarding this.
Yeah, read that part.
I'll read it directly from the source because the wording feels incredibly deliberate. It states, quote, "This site and its content, including all Echo Riff films, Bobby by Bade magazine posts, and Sovereign Diagnostics, are not affiliated with any government, political party, intelligence agency, or activist group."
That is a fascinating legal boundary to draw around a theoretical cosmology project.
Right. It reads less like an academic abstract and more like a liability waiver for a reality-altering event.
Yeah, you don't usually see particle physicists putting out disclaimers clarifying they aren't working for a clandestine intelligence agency.
I know. To be clear for our listeners, our goal here is to just unpack the original material impartially, right?
Yeah.
We aren't endorsing any specific viewpoint, just analyzing how Dr. Sewell builds this canon.
Absolutely. And to understand the philosophy behind that sovereign diagnostic disclaimer, we have to look at how the source text describes these materials.
Right.
It refers to the framework as mythic infrastructure, a cinematic indictment, and a sovereign broadcast.
Cinematic indictment. That is such a powerful phrase.
It really is.
It suggests that the act of simply observing or publishing this data is in itself an accusation.
Exactly. And the text explicitly outlines the target of that accusation. The broadcast is supposedly designed to expose ritualized containment, actor convergence, and systemic erosion.
Systemic erosion.
Right. And we should be very clear here, especially given how charged phrases like systemic erosion can sound today. The text explicitly frames these as structural diagnostic tools. We're looking at this impartially as an exploration of Dr. Sewell's architecture.
Right. The disclaimer insists these are not traditional political endorsements or critiques.
Yeah, think of it more through the lens of a systems engineer diagnosing a failing global network.
Okay, I like that analogy.
The engineer isn't making a political statement about the hardware. They're running a diagnostic to find out where the data is being artificially bottlenecked.
Ah, I see.
So ritualized containment implies that our baseline reality, the way human beings currently exist, perceive time and process information, is being artificially restricted or contained by unseen systems.
So Dr. Sewell's tools, like the reality level analyzer and the category theory mathematics, they are the diagnostic software meant to ping the edges of that containment.
Yes.
They are trying to find the walls of the box we're in.
Exactly. And the title of a previous editorial note referenced in the sources hammers this point home perfectly. It's called Sovereignty Beyond NSF.
And NSF stands for the National Science Foundation, right?
Right, which is the primary funding engine for legitimate scientific research in the United States.
So, by titling a piece Sovereignty Beyond NSF, Dr. Sewell is drawing a really hard line. He's highlighting a deliberate, necessary separation from traditional state-funded science.
Because if your stated goal is to diagnose the structural containment of reality itself, you cannot rely on the funding, the peer review, or the permission of the very institutions that govern and maintain that baseline reality.
That makes total sense. You can't effectively audit a massive system if your paycheck comes from that system's administrators.
Exactly. The diagnostic approach has to be sovereign. It must exist completely outside traditional power structures, unaffiliated with governments or activist groups, to remain structurally objective.
Wow, it is just a staggering conceptual leap. Because Bye 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 magazine and the Cosmic University, they haven't just published a story.
No.
And they haven't just published a scientific theory. They've created this fascinating new ecosystem of information. The sources even mention a corporate structure called TrueFlow Games embedded in this directory.
Right, so they're blending hard academic open access data, corporate game development structures, and really rich mythic storytelling into a unified canon.
It's incredible, and it leaves us with a rather profound provocation for you to mull over. We started this deep dive talking about the expectation of precision when you look at a scientific diagnosis or a database.
Right.
You expect clean, categorical boundaries, real or fiction, data or lore.
But Dr. Sewell has weaponized those exact boundaries. Think about the implications for a second.
Okay.
If a completely unconventional mythic framework of reality featuring entities born from multiversal friction can utilize the exact same rigorous archiving tools, software models, and structural records as mainstream particle physics,
Right.
at what point does the mythic infrastructure become completely indistinguishable from the real infrastructure?
Because if the container is what makes the science feel real, and the multiversal rift fits perfectly inside that container, complete with a verified DOI number and a CERN repository timestamp.
What if the format we use to validate academic truth is just an empty container?
Oh, wow.
A beautifully constructed, perfectly to code house, simply waiting for someone to come along and pour an entirely different universe into it.
The terrifying and honestly thrilling part is realizing that once the new universe is poured into the perfectly formatted container, there is structurally no way to prove it doesn't belong there.
Exactly.
So next time you scroll through a peer-reviewed academic database, you might want to double-check the abstract. You might just be looking at the structural record of a broken reality.